Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying all of the sessions so far. It's been a very exciting day. Next we have Jennifer Shettle and Emily Meixner, and they are going to talk with us about close reading as a yes writing instruction. They've got lots of fantastic things to share, and so I'm going to turn it over to Emily now.
Hi everybody, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. We're going to introduce ourselves a little bit. And then Jen's going to introduce you to some of the topics we're going to be talking about today, and then we're going to get started. There are going to be times when we ask you to do a little bit of tweeting and a little bit of joining in that way, so I hope you will participate actively as much as you can. So my name is Emily Meixner. I don't have a name tag because we couldn't figure out how to do that, but I work at the College of New Jersey. I am the coordinator of the English education program there, and I've been here for 13 years. I spend my days teaching courses on English secondary pedagogy, reading and writing methods, and I also teach courses on children's and young adult literature. So if you want to introduce yourselves, you can do so by using the EdCollab gathering hashtag, so hashtag the EdCollab gathering, hashtag 8, that's our session number. So Jen's going to introduce herself to you now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Shettle, and I am from Millersville University in Pennsylvania. And I teach undergraduate courses in reading and literacy strategies and methods. And I also work with our graduate students as well. So I help to prepare reading specialists. And that is a K-12 program. So I work with a wide range of students and love getting out into the schools and seeing all the great things that are going on. Now, we'd also like for you to introduce yourself as well. And so go ahead and tweet where you're from, and also what you hope to learn from this session. And we're super excited.
So I am going to bring up our first slide, and then Jen's going to talk you through a little bit about what's going to happen in our session today. So let me get that, and I will screen share that with everybody. So this is our title session, and here's the EdCollab gathering hashtag, as well as the workshop number.
So our presentation today is going to kind of cover 3 things. We're going to spend just a short period of time on just talking about what is close reading. And then we're going to go into the heart of our presentation today, which is the close reading and writing connection. And then we're going to take you through a few exercises where we practice noticing, naming, and replicating.
Good. So in my work at TCNJ, one of the things that I do is I teach a teaching writing methods course. And in that course, one of the issues that I've noticed is that my students have a really difficult time making the transition from reading instruction to writing instruction. They're really good at talking about literary elements, about characterization. They're good at talking about symbolism, but they have a really difficult time talking specifically and explicitly about craft. So the problem that we're going to try and address today, and I'm going to screen share this with you, is a problem that I encounter on a regular basis, right? How do we make this transition from teaching reading to teaching writing? And so our solution, at least the one that we're going to take you through today, or the one that I'm working through in some of my classes, and Jen is using as well in her classes, is this idea that we need to develop a language to talk about craft. And we can use close reading strategies, close reading opportunities to, and I'm giving thanks to Kylene and Bob here, to notice and note and practice some of the moves that are, that the authors that we're looking at in terms of our mentor texts, that they're making. So so that's kind of the big gist of what we're going to be talking about today. Go ahead, Jen.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't hear you, Em. All right, so we're going to start out with just a quick review of what is close reading really, because I think that with the emphasis that has been placed on close reading with the Common Core and sort of this intense focus on this type of reading process. We thought it was just important just to start with this idea. So our understanding of close reading is that it is a process and is not a program. I know that when we search Pinterest or any of the kind of teacher sharing sites, that there's sort of this myth of the 3 times, right? We're going to read something and then we're going to read it again and do some underlining and annotating and highlighting, and then we're going to read it again and go even deeper. And certainly close reading is about a purposeful rereading of text. But that might vary depending on what the text is. And it also might vary depending on who your readers are and how many times they need to dive back into something for a close look. So that slide that Emily just had up was just a few of our favorite quotes from some of our favorite sources, including, of course, the Lehman and Roberts Falling in Love with Close Reading, Kylene Beers and Bob Probst, and their look at close reading in Notice and Note, and then the Moss, Lapp, Grant, and Johnson text, A Close Look at Close Reading. And one of the things that all of the professional books and professional resources, I think, share and have in common is just this idea that close reading is something that we have students do, right? It's this process. It's not this kind of programmed approach to reading. So we thought it was just important to start there.
If any of you happen to have resources that you use for close reading that you really, really love, please feel free to tweet those out, because I know that those will be valuable to people who are watching, and they'll also be helpful for us because we're always looking for materials that we can use as well. So what happened a couple of summers ago for me is that I was reading Chris Lim and Kate Roberts' book, Falling in Love with Close Reading, and as I was reading it, I kept thinking to myself, something about this strikes me as rich, right? The content that they're giving us here is rich. It's rich in terms of the way in which we look at the lenses that they're using in that book to read for literary devices, but it's also really interesting to think about the way in which they're using lenses to read for craft. And at that time, I had been really struggling with, how do I get my students to talk about craft? And it seemed to me as I was reading that book that some of the language that they were using was perfect for what it was that I wanted my students to be noticing in my teaching writing class. So over the course of the last couple of years, as I've been thinking about that book and working in my writing class, I've been trying to identify some of the differences between how you close read as a reader and how you close read as a writer. And so what I'm going to show you is a chart that I've begun using with my students to help them in some ways see the difference. So I'll share that with you right now and talk you through it a little bit. Okay, so if you're looking at the slide, on the left hand are all of the things that Lehman and Roberts and other people who talk about close reading, these are all the things that they say that we can notice, right? Word choice and language, sentence structure, and we do all these things, as I mentioned before, really to deepen our engagement with literary elements, character, setting, tone, symbolism. And if we're reading nonfiction, then we're often reading these things to get a sense of how an argument is organized and articulated. But as a writer, these using these lenses can also be incredibly valuable because they help us, as I say in the first part of this box, to make visible the choices that a writer is making as he or she is putting a piece together, right? And if we're noticing those things, then we can begin, in fact, to name and imitate and replicate those. And that's what's so exciting about this, that in some ways, the language of close reading becomes the language that we also use for talking about craft. And so we've begun to do some experimenting with this in our classes and with our students. Do you want to add anything, Jen?
No, that captures it. Awesome.
Okay. So one of the issues, though, at least one of the things that I was thinking about initially when I was working with this with my students is that I would, we would make visible these craft choices. We would be reading and identifying what the craft moves were, and somehow that just wasn't enough, right? Noticing and naming them didn't mean that they could extend their thinking into talking about why the author would have been making that kind of a choice. And it took me a while to sort of figure out that that's not what they were doing, that they were noticing and they were naming, but they weren't really moving that next step to talk about why. And I just happened recently to be reading a book by Paula Bork called Close Writing. I actually have it here on my desk. I'll give a shout out to this particular book and to Paula Bork. And one of the things that she says in this book is she talks about how students don't often know how to read their own writing and read it closely because they don't know what possibilities they have, what craft possibilities, what other craft possibilities there are for their writing. And I realized that this was something that was happening for my students too, because they weren't moving from the what it is to the why an author is using it. They weren't able to see how what these authors were doing were possibilities in their own writing. So stop there. Jen, you want to add anything that you're seeing with your students too?
Yeah, sure. So, we've been doing a lot of work and reading a lot of resources on mentor texts, and I think that that idea and concept has been around for a while. And I think again we kind of get into this sort of set of lessons, right, where we use some specific texts to model some writing techniques. And in the moment, I think those things work as quick writes for our students. But Emily and I were, looking for something that would be maybe just a more prolonged exercise, right? Because the goal is to help improve their style of writing for future pieces, not just the quick write or the little mini piece, right, that we're working on to practice a certain technique.
I noticed that I'm just remembering to unmute my microphone. I'm noticing that there are some tweets about, asking about the difference between close reading as a writer and close reading as a reader. So I'm gonna bring up the screen share that I just had up a minute ago. And then I'm going to move into the next one and give you an example of what this potentially could look like in a classroom. So as a reader, we're noticing all of the things in the left side of the chart, but again, we're reading them, we're using them to think about how a character develops, or how to visualize a setting, or to really sort of get a sense of the tone that an author is creating. But when we're close reading as a writer, it's really about being in conversation with the text and seeing these writing choices as deliberate, strategic writing choices, and to identify them and to name them, and then to talk about why an author might be using them. So let's move to the next slide. I need to give another. Oh, Jen, do you want to jump in here?
Just real quick, because I was thinking about that question from Twitter, the Twitterverse as well, and I think it's a great question, right? And I think there is a lot of overlap and symmetry, but one of the things that we found that when we're practicing close reading with our students, they're pretty good at reading to notice, literary elements, or, even do some of that deeper thinking as far as inferring or drawing conclusions or making comparisons across different types of text. But when we ask them to read from the viewpoint or the lens of the writer, and think about the specific deliberate intentions that the writer had when they were creating that piece, it's a little bit like radio silence, I think, from, at times, right? Because they're like, oh, well, I don't know why the writer did that, right? So I think that, starting with close reading really makes a lot of sense, and then using that as a bridge to talk about writer's purpose and writer's intentions.
That's, sorry, again, I'm having microphone issues. But as you were saying that, that's exactly what I was seeing with my students, right? So I would ask them to talk about craft, and they would continually either gravitate towards talking about grammar, or they would gravitate towards giving me summaries of what the author had said. And I kept saying, I don't want you to summarize, and I don't necessarily want you to pick apart the grammar. I want us to talk about craft. But they really didn't know how to do this, even if they were beginning to name the things that they were seeing. And so one of the alumni of the teacher education program that I coordinate, she created this series of STEM starters for her students. She has 9th and 10th grade students, and she teaches at Hightstown High School in New Jersey. Her name is Katie Cubano. And she created some of these STEM starters to help her students, her 9th and 10th grade students, move from this idea of, just naming to really thinking about why. Why would an author be making these kinds of choices? And so she doesn't give these STEM starters. This feels to me a little bit like Kylene Beers and Bob Probst's Say Something, when you're doing that Say Something exercise and you have to talk about how you're thinking as you're reading. You wouldn't give her kids, all of them at the same time, but you would have them sort of focus their attention on ones that are immediately applicable to a particular text. So in the case of word choice, I like it when the writer uses repetition here. I like it when the author uses these kinds of adjectives because, right, it creates a feeling of, or maybe she's trying to. So the idea is that beyond just naming, the students have to infer, hypothesize, right? They have to develop a hunch about the impact that the author is trying to create in using these craft moves. And when I saw this chart that she had created, I just thought, oh my gosh, that's right, that's it, that's genius, right? Because we have to teach kids how to talk about craft. It's not just we have to teach them to name what authors are doing, but we really have to teach them how to talk about it and give them a language to do so, because that's not something that for many of them comes, I think, particularly intuitively.
Right, and I think that, to piggyback on that, we really think that all of this work starts in that kind of collaborative talk environment. So we definitely piggyback here on the work of Doug Fisher and Nancy Fry, and of course, Kylene Beers and Bob Probst again, when we're talking about having those conversations as a group, as in a large group, small groups, one-on-one, before asking kids to go off and kind of do those things on their own.
Yeah, and I think the discussion piece of it is really important, right? That they can hear other people looking at a piece of writing and talking about the impact that it might have, and they can decide whether or not that's working in a piece of writing that they happen to be working on. And through all of this talk, right, they get modeled for them over and over and over the idea that an author isn't just writing, right? An author is making conscious decisions every time he or she decides to do something that is intentional and helps them say what it is that they want to say in the most powerful way possible to them. So Jen and I wanted to give you an example of what this might look like or how we might model this. So one of the texts that I like to use with my method students comes out of a book called Shug by Jenny Han, which is a wonderful middle-level book. Some of you might be familiar with it already. Jenny Han writes for young adults, but she also has written some wonderful middle grade novels, and this one is kind of a young girl's coming of age story. And when the book opens, you discover that she has a crush on her best friend, Mark, who lives across the street, but it's a tenuous kind of crush. She loves him and hates him and loves him and hates him and loves him and hates him, and he has a crush on her older sister who is really beautiful. So he sees her as a friend, but he doesn't really recognize her. And so there's this passage at the beginning of the novel where she is talking about how it's just not, how this isn't fair, right? How sometimes moths can turn into butterflies, and how prettiness is both internal and external, and how he doesn't see it. So it's a wonderful passage. For those of you who have the book, it's on page 11, in case you want to find it. But it's a wonderful passage, and Hannah's doing a number of things with the writing. Like, for example, she's using a bunch of different kinds of sentences: long sentences, short sentences, right, simple sentences, compound complex sentences. She's embedded a whole bunch of rhetorical questions into that passage. And she's also using a lot of colloquial speech because, you know, as many young adult and middle-level novels are, they're written in the first person, and so the protagonist sounds like the protagonist. So I have my students look at this particular passage and mark it up, right? What are they noticing? What are they seeing? And then we often talk through it using, and I'll go back and bring them up again, using STEM starters like the ones that Katie has developed for her 9th and 10th grade classes. So what this ends up kind of sounding like with my students is this. So when we might look at the sentences, I'll say something like, I think this mixture of short and long sentences effectively captures the character's speech patterns, right? That's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like she's speaking to me, and sometimes she says short things, and sometimes she has very long thoughts. I'm noticing that the character often emphasizes what she's saying with very short sentences, or with rhetorical questions, right? They really put the reader in conversation with the narrator. I think they reveal characterization. The narrator's thoughtful and constantly questioning what's right or fair. So I'll model the use of some of these STEM starters for the students so that they can hear them, and then I'll ask them to go back into the passage and use this same kind of language to talk about what they're noticing. So again, it's very much like a say something that you would have seen a reader use when they're beginning to notice things that they're reading in a text. Jen, should I move on?
Right.
Or?
Well, so I think just one of the things that, you know, obviously we're advocating for here as well is that use of the gradual release of responsibility model, right? So we spend a lot of time in the modeling phase because this is not necessarily language or thinking or dialogue about writing that comes naturally to our future teachers, to our students that we're working with. And so the modeling piece is, you know, we have to stay in that phase for quite some time. And then of course that shared and guided practice as well before we really start to see any sort of transfer to independence.
Okay, so what we thought we might do with you is take you through the process a little bit. So I want you to imagine that you are embarking on a genre studies unit with your students, and it's a genre studies unit about how to write a book review. I'm actually, coincidentally, doing this right now. I'm going to talk about book reviews on Monday with my teaching writing class, so they're going to do something almost identical to what we're going to show you today. So you want to imagine that you're being immersed in all of these different kinds of book reviews because, you know, with genre studies, the idea is that you want to have the kids see a bunch of different kinds of book reviews and try and parcel out from all of those different reviews what are some of the similarities in those book reviews, and then what are some of the differences, and what kinds of a book review might they want to write. So what I've done is I occasionally write book reviews for Alan Picks for the Assembly for Literature on Adolescence. Any of you can do this. So if you'd like to review books, and I would encourage you professionally to do this, but occasionally I will do this. And so what I have for you to take a look at on the next slide, and I'm going to bring that up in a second, is a book review that I wrote. Again, with my classes, I think it's really important that they see us, right, their teachers, as authentic writers, right, that we're really writing things that go out into the world, not just, comments on their papers. So I often show them some of the reviews that I write. I like this one because they're really short, and like the Jenny Han passage, you can zoom in fairly quickly and take a look at some things. So I'm going to bring it up. I can read it out loud, or Jen, do you want to read it out loud?
Sure, I'll read it out loud. Absolutely.
All right, let me bring it up, and so you can hear it. So let me show you what it looks like. It's very short.
For as long as he can remember, 15-year-old Jack Walsh has wanted to be a jockey. Working as an exercise rider for Pelton Stables, Jack suddenly finds himself in the limelight when Pelton's famed jockey, Showboat McGinn, is tragically injured, and he is promised to bug boy or apprentice jockey. Talented and immediately successful, Jack quickly learns that with his newfound fame comes both sacrifice and danger. When he is approached by a local thug to fix an upcoming race, Jack must ultimately choose between the glitz and glamour he is just beginning to taste and his own personal integrity. Set in 1934 in Saratoga Springs, New York, at the Saratoga racetrack, Looper's novel is as fast-paced and exciting as the races themselves. His descriptions of the races are vivid, his protagonist likable and engaging, and the portrait Looper paints of the lives of jockeys is simultaneously sympathetic and grim. As Jack pushes his body to the limits, embarks upon his first romance, confronts his down-and-out father, and struggles to know what to do is right, readers will cheer him all the way to the finish line. By Emily Meixner.
Thank you. That's so fun to hear someone read something that you've written.
Is it weird?
Okay, yeah, it's really fun. So what we're going to ask you to do is to think back to all of the different ways that you might close read any kind of text that you want to close read. So thinking about word choice, thinking about sentence structure, thinking about punctuation, figurative language, thinking about organization. And we're just going to take maybe a minute of silence. and I'm going to leave this up on the screen. And I want you just to see what you notice the writer, me, in this case me, which is sort of weird, what you notice me doing. What kinds of things are you noticing in terms of craft in this piece? So, like I said, we'll take about a minute of silence and just let you read it and look at it and think about it. And then in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how we might approach it with our students. I do this with my students too. I start getting antsy. I'm like, is that a minute? Is that 30, is that 30 seconds? All right. So this is what we do. We'd have them, take this text. Let me put my face face back on. We'd have them take this text, we'd have them mark it up, see what they notice, and then talk with each other about it. I mean, there's really no right or no wrong, depending on which stage you happen to be in the process. So one of the things that we did for the next slide is we imagined that the students were just sort of trying to get a sense of how long these are, and what the content might look like. So one of the things that I might ask the students to do is I might ask them, I'll share this with you, to see how many sentences there actually are. And then to identify what actually each sentence is doing. How much time does the author spend on summary? Or how much does the how much time does the author spend on, setting, or any of the aspects that would go into writing a book review, on evaluation. So, Jen, what were some of the things that you were noticing as you were reading?
Yeah, so this was fun because Emily and I tried to hypothesize what would people notice, and please feel free to tweet some of the things that you noticed as well. And certainly, all of those things that we came up with, we wouldn't talk about all of every single thing with students, right? We'd want that to be a much more organic conversation, built around what did they notice, and why did that stand out to them, or why did they choose that, or what was important about that. And then I think the other important thing that we'd want to do in our practice in our classrooms is that if we're gonna highlight or spotlight a specific genre or type of writing, in this case the book review, we'd want students to then look at a variety of different book reviews, right? So that was Emily's for Alan, but then also let's pull up some from Amazon, let's pull up some from Goodreads, let's take a look at the New York Times book review. Mm-hmm. So we'd want to have this sort of wide spectrum, so then as we're starting to build our writer's bank of knowledge about what features or what specific items or writer's craft need to be included in a book review, we have all of these different examples.
Yeah, that's right. And both Jen and I have written, maybe you mentioned this because I was responding to some tweets, both Jen and I have written reviews for Nerdy Book Club, which is a great source for getting book reviews. Someone on Twitter, Jackie Epler, thank you, Jackie, for being with us today, asked if I would post some links to some of the book reviews that I have written, that Jen has written, and other ones that we're recommending here. Absolutely. After the presentation, we'll tweet those out to everybody so that you can have access to them. I also wanted to mention, and I'm going to show you another slide with some other things that we were noticing and naming in this book review. I have also done this. In fact, I just did this yesterday for my class on Monday night. I talked about craft in a book review using screencast.com. So I went ahead and annotated it, and then I captured it on the screen, and for about 5 minutes, I just talked through what I was noticing about the craft of a particular piece and why I thought that those craft moves were particularly important in that book review. And I'm going to share that with my students on Monday night. But if any of you are interested, I can also give you the link to that so you can hear what that might look like if you want to create a digital image or a digital audio bonanza of you talking about craft in a particular excerpt of writing. Those are really useful too, and students can go back and forth and look at them because they're online. So I'll share that link. I'll share that link too. Okay, so some of the things that we thought maybe you would notice as you were reading this this passage was, maybe you would notice things like parallel structure, right? Jack pushes his body to the limits, embarks upon his first romance, confronts his down-and-out father, and struggles to know and do what is right. Maybe you would notice that all of those parts of that sentence are in some ways parallel or symmetrically articulated. Maybe we thought you would notice the simile, right? The comparison between the novel and the races. Maybe you would notice that there was some alliteration going on, the glitz and the glamour, or the portrait that Looper paints. Or maybe you were thinking more about sentence structure, right? That you were thinking, oh, look it, there are some sort of straightforward sentences, but there are also some sentences that begin with participle phrases, right? That provide information about the author or about the setting or something in the sentence before the sentence actually begins. So all of these things could be things that our kids are potentially noticing in their writing. And all of them, I think, are valuable to talk about because in most cases, people who are writing fluently are using all of these techniques at different times to make their piece more powerful, make the writing more powerful in their pieces. So let's see. Jen, was there anything else that you noticed? Was there something that I forgot to mention on there?
I was doing a quick search for the Allen book picks, so I did find it, and we're going to get that link tweeted out to you.
Great, great. So once we have the students do this, right? Once we have the students and we're really still in the noticing and naming part of this. You know, we have them notice what they're seeing, we have them name what they're seeing, we have them use those STEM starters to make some inferences about why the author might be doing this. But then we need to take it a step further, right? If the students don't get an opportunity to actually try these techniques, these craft techniques in their own writing, then we haven't gone to, I think, even, you know, the most important step in this process, in this close reading as a writer process, right? When we close read as a writer, we're really digging into the text to understand the text. When we're reading as a writer, we're looking at it because we want to use these mentor texts to understand how certain craft moves can make what we're saying more powerful. So we need to take them to a point where they're now replicating, noticing, naming, and replicating, where they're replicating some of the things that they're seeing these mentor authors do. And this can be really fun. I think the students often think, am I plagiarizing? And I'm like, no, you're filling the sentences with your own content, but you're using these sentences, these frameworks as guides. You're using these craft techniques as guides to think about what you're writing. And getting back to Paula Bork's book, getting back to the possibilities in your writing. What could your writing sound like? So let me show you, and I'll bring up this screen again, where you see, right, some of the things that we're noticing. And if I scroll down then to the next slide, right, you'll see, okay, so maybe the students notice this sort of use of strong verbs and parallel structure, right? As Jack pushes and barks, confronts, struggles, and then they might have used STEM starters like, I like when the writer uses vivid specific verbs because, or I'm noticing how the repeated structure within the sentence builds momentum. So then the idea would be to try and create a sentence in their own book reviews that sound a little bit like this, right? So my example, and the one that I'm going to show my students on Monday night, is from a book review that I'm going to write about this wonderful, again, middle-level book that came out just recently called Towers Falling. All of you should read it if you haven't read it because it's so wonderful. But the main character, have you read it, Jen?
I have read it, yes. I read all 4 of the big 9/11 books that came out. So I was in a little bit of a 9/11, fog there, and they're all fantastic.
Yeah, this one is really wonderful. It's about a 5th grader, and her name is Deja. And so I thought, okay, let me try and use this kind of a sentence in my review. So what I did was I used this same structure and thought very strategically about like the verbs that I wanted to use. So I wrote, as Deja befriends Ben and Sabine, digs into her family's history and learns more about the events of 9/11. So this would be a sentence that would go then maybe into my book review, but at least I'm trying out the structure so that I have a sense of whether or not it's something that I like. If I wanted to try a participle phrase, I could do something like this, and then I would create a sentence using that structure And I would name that structure for my kids so that they had a sense of what it was and how it worked. And then they would go and try and find a place in their book reviews where they could do something similar. But they would have to notice it, they would have to name it and talk about why that they thought it was useful and important and help the writing, and then they would have to replicate it. So that would be the process. So I think, all right, so I'm looking at the Twitter feed now to see if there are any specific questions or comments that other people had that we can respond to. So if you do have questions, we've got a couple minutes at the end here. If you do have questions that you'd like us to respond to, please feel free to go ahead and tweet those out so that we can, so that we can answer whatever questions you might be having that we haven't gotten to so far. We've got about, I think, five minutes left. Jenna, any last sort of comments or thoughts from you?
So, this has been a lot of fun, and I can't wait to really read back through the Twitter feed because it's definitely hard to do them both at once. And Emily and I will spend some time on that later today responding to all of you. So please feel free to keep those questions coming. And, there's so many great professional resources out there that can help you get started on this. Emily showed the close writing book. We name a few in our reference slide as well at the end. And also I would say, the idea of mentor sentences, right, from Jeff Anderson's book, Mechanically Inclined. So that's another, resource that we pull heavily from as well, because, we really think that this noticing, naming, replicating, it's all around us really in the professional literature. And, we just, invite you to share your sources as well.
Mm-hmm. I need to show you this last slide that Jen and I created because we were so proud of it. So as we were thinking about, how we wanted to end the presentation, we were thinking about, how to invite questions. So we created Bitmojis for ourselves. And I think we got pretty close. So we thought we would share these with you.
If you haven't created your own Bitmoji, we highly recommend it. We had a lot of fun with it.
That's right. That's right. So I am going to scroll down too so that you can also see some of this lists, these books that we've been reading, and these are ones that Jen mentioned too, right? Jeff Anderson's Mechanically Inclined. And I also, this semester, I've been using Everyday Editing, also by Jeff Anderson. Oh. And I like that one too. That one also is really specific. And again, gives kids language and gives teachers language for how to talk about all different kinds of things that are happening in sentences. Beers and Propes, Notice and Note, which we mentioned. This is Paula Bork's very new book. And I'm only, maybe like 10, 20 pages in, but already I've underlined. I feel like one of my new students were like, I'm underlining everything. It's been really great. And then the Robertson Lehman book, Falling in Love with Close Reading. Again, if you haven't seen that book, the way that they're talking about reading, right, it's really incredible how much transfer there is when it comes to talking about writing. And then I haven't read this one, Jen, the Moss, Lapp, Grant, and Johnson book. Can you say a little bit more about that one?
Yeah, so there's kind of two versions of that, and I should have it right here on my shelf, but of course I'm not going to be able to find it at this very second. But there's sort of an elementary focused version and then an upper grades focused version. I think, if you're searching for more guidance and resources for the close reading part and what should students be noticing and talking about and thinking about when they're doing this close and purposeful type of reading, it's just another really excellent resource.
And I think the objective for all of this, at least with my students, and my students, if those of you join later, my students are going to be future teachers, so they're all teacher ed students. I find that in some ways meta-processing their own reading isn't particularly difficult for them once they understand that that's one of the things that they're supposed to be doing for their middle school and high school students. But meta-processing their writing that is really challenging for them because they haven't thought, I think, about their writing in that particular way. And a lot of the students that I'm seeing now, many of them, you know, have very specific formatting experiences with their writing. So, you know, they're given kind of a 5-paragraph template, which they've learned to fill in, and they expand it to write their college essays. But when we move towards another genre, like a book review or a narrative poem or a memoir, they get a little anxious about how to make choices, right? And learning to talk about what they're doing and to notice what writers are doing and to meta-process their own craft makes it so much easier for them to move beyond instruction that just focuses on formatting, right? It really allows them to talk about the relationship between what it is that they want to say and how it is that they're going to say it. And I think that, you know, that for them is both like mind-blowing, but also really liberating. And for their kids, I'm hoping that that will be the same experience that they have. Oh, I noticed that someone here, Fran, thank you, Fran, for tweeting out this whole time, has mentioned Mentor Sentences for Mechanically Inclined, right? Also a so-so, right? As a really, really good book for people to check out. So, any last thoughts, Jen?
I think that we're, you know, basically out of time. So, you know, thanks for being part of this big conversation, and we can't wait to continue just to learn and think and grow along with all of you in our practice and in the way we both, you know, read and write texts.
And I think too, you know, if there's something that was particularly useful about the presentation today, or something that you go into your classrooms and you try, if you could tweet that at us or, you know, share it with us. I can also make our emails available to you if you want to do that, because we'd
How about me? Can you hear me? All right, so Emily lost sound, but we're out of time, and absolutely, tweet us, follow us on Twitter, and we'll be happy to continue the conversation there. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Emily and Jennifer. I hope everyone enjoyed this as much as I did. There were so many amazing and purposeful tips to use for close reading and writing. Really fantastic. I hope everyone is able to tune in for some of session 3. We will have Connecting the Dots, the Power of a Global Plan. Workshop 11 will be Global Read Alouds. Workshop 12, Going Public with Kids Writing, Rethinking Audience, Purpose and Feedback. Will be about women in leadership. And workshop 14 will be about picture books for every grade, the power of shared stories. And then there will be a 4th session with loads more fantastic things. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in.